This is the Unrationed podcast, and it's been a hot minute since we've recorded an episode. A lot of life has gone down. Josh has a new baby. Tony is now a Canadian green card holder, and it is 2023. What's up? And what's your wild moments from however long it's been since we last recorded?
All right. It's a pretty good duration for capturing a wild moment.
Yeah.
Could I say that while I was at the gym on a tread, since the last time we recorded, I've joined a gym. That's a major thing that's happened. And I was on the treadmill yesterday, and on the TV was a show about animals eating other animals. And I saw a snake and a gecko in a fight to the death, and then the snake swallowed the gecko. I saw a lion take out it was like a muskox or something that was sort of like a wildebeest that was stuck in mud. I saw a lion take out another lion, like a cub. Yeah, that wasn't like part of its family. That was pretty intense. How does this count? I mean, it felt wild, like watching this while I'm running on the treadmills. Like
I don't think anybody has the right to disqualify a wild moment, because it does seem as though something about what we're talking about is an internal metric, like something that feels wild sometimes can just be how you feel on the inside. And if watching animals kill each other on TV while you were on a treadmill in a gym made you feel something on the inside, then yes, that is a wild moment.
It did. It was a reminder of just how far, we've come, where, it's just not something I spend time really thinking about. No, there was one time I was in South Africa and went on kind of a safari out at Kruger Park, which is this huge, it's like a nature preserve the size of Israel or something like that, and saw crocodiles that were going after a hippo carcass, like on a sandbank. That was a wild moment.
Yeah.
It was like 9 years ago, but that was pretty wild. Josh, How about you?
Stuck with you. Oh man, I got two, I guess. So we're in the middle of Wild32 right now, and I was telling my group that my sleep's been like jacked up. So I'm like been getting up early. We have the third kiddo, as Evan mentioned, and so a little bit different sleep patterns. And so I lay the kids down and I get up quite a bit throughout the night. Well, I've been falling asleep, and so I have to like wake up and get all my like disciplines in, whether it's running, being outside, reading. And it sucks. I'm like exhausted. I want to go to bed, but I know I got to get some of it in. So
because something's at stake this time too.
Yeah. What's at stake is Evan's mustache or Tony's beard, which I'm sure we'll get into at some point today.
Yeah.
However, so I'm on Team Tony, Team Beard. And so I feel very responsible for preserving that beard. And anyways, so it's like, I don't know if this could disqualify me. We might have to take points away from me, but it was like 1 o'clock in the morning and I have to get my time outside. And so I'm like, I just stand on my deck at 1 o'clock in the morning. It's like snowing outside. I'm in a jacket, and I'm just like standing there because I don't want to walk around. So I'm just like envisioning like people driving by and like, what a creeper. I have like my hood up and it's like 20 degrees out. But I stayed out there for 10 minutes and I was freezing afterwards. But anyways, I got it in. That felt good to just be outside, but also somewhat of a wild moment. And then my other one, if I can have two, if you don't mind, it's been a long time since we've recorded. Yeah. So anyways, I've had this cyst on my arm. You both have probably seen it when we were running, and I've never liked it, but I'm like, I don't need to get rid of it. I'm like, that's just vain or whatever. And anyways, I like started getting freaked out about it. Like, okay, well, what if this thing is skin cancer or something? So after 12 years of having this thing like bulging from my arm, so anyways, I've had this cyst in my arm, which is quite, it's uncomfortable. Like it would hurt at different times, but I'm like, I don't need to get it taken out. For whatever reason, it was like, uh I was like, okay, I don't need to take it out because I'm self-conscious of it. So because I'm self-conscious of it, I just need to sit with it and just allow it to be there. For some reason, it was like a discipline or something. Anyways, I started getting kind of freaked out about it at the end of last year, like right when my daughter was going to come. I'm like, well, what if I have cancer? What if this? And, so I started playing all those things through my head. Anyways, I got it taken out on Tuesday, and it was just weird, like laying on a table, having someone cut me open and then take this like marble sized thing out of my body and then go about their day. And me too.
What
But
type of sedation or numbing did they use?
they just did a local. So like,
Okay.
the back of my arm was, it was all numbed up, and they're sitting there cutting in it, and they're like cauterizing it so I can like smell my skin burning, which is also very weird and quite graphic.
Yeah.
But yeah, it went very well, and they sent it off to the lab, and hopefully it comes back as no big deal. I am not worried about it. Which you got, Evan?
The idea of I'm stuck on the idea of somebody cutting into my body while I'm awake. It is like a really mental, like that is very mentally tough for me.
Yeah.
So that I can't really like my mind is like running through scenarios of how I would respond, and then is something wrong with the way I would respond. So anyways, that has me thinking, because I listened to this podcast. I'm going to do a tangent and then my wild moment, if that's okay. That's what podcasts are essentially for. This podcast I listened to, this guy named Roland Griffiths. He's a professor at, I believe, Harvard, and he leads the psychedelic research department and has for quite some time. So he speaks on meditation and psychedelics fairly often, and recently was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. So this is like in December, he was diagnosed with this stage 4 pancreatic cancer, and he appeared on 2 podcasts that I somewhat pay attention to. One is Tim Ferriss, and Tim Ferriss interviewed him, and it was an incredible interview about death and like leaning into this last stage of life, and this diagnosis awakening him to more of reality. I recommend the episode for anybody, whether you're interested in psychedelics or not. They're not like making a case for it. It's just what he does and kind of pulls from those experiences. But one of the things he's doing is asking for no anesthesia and no numbing as he goes through his medical procedures using meditation techniques. And so he's like talking about laying on tables and having procedures done, and just being fully aware and in the moment throughout the entire process, just using meditation. So that also came to mind as you were talking about it, because that really gripped me. And his curiosity about the human experience is what leads him to ask the doctors to not numb anything. It's like, I want to know what it feels like to be human in a very deep sense. And that's really gripping. And I'm like nowhere even near interested in that, nor do I think I could handle it. Like I'm not at a place psychologically or whatever you would call that to handle it, but it's very intriguing. Yeah.
Really. Well, I had 2 attempts of this operation prior to me getting it taken out. None of them, the other 2 were not from medical professionals, nor was there any. So when I was first getting like checked out, they're like, there's a scar on this. And they're like, it's kind of like broken into like 2 fatty tumors or whatever. They're like, did someone try to cut this out? And I'm like, yes, twice. So I had a couple buddies, and we were
Oh
doing
my God.
I think you need to tell. Can you tell those stories?
The first one was actually my wife, and at the time my girlfriend and my brother. We were like at my parents' house, and they wanted to see if we could cut it out. And so I was like, yeah, let's do it. So they have this is like dull ass X-Acto knife, and we use ice to like rub on it, and they couldn't puncture the skin or whatever. So I'm like sitting there, and they're like trying to cut this thing out. This was many, many years ago, like 14 years ago. The second instance was about like 3 years ago. And I had a couple of buddies in town visiting me in Colorado, and one of them said, he was like giving me trouble about it. He's like, that thing needs to come out. I'm going to cut that thing out. I was like, fine, you can do it. And so he was trying to cut it with a pretty sharp X-Acto knife this time around, but he was getting sick, and so he couldn't do it. So anyways, appreciate this professor's desire to be experience the human experience more fully.
I mean, even you just saying yes to a buddy with an X-Acto knife is like pretty intense mental something that I just either don't possess or haven't developed. I would be very curious to find out what part of the brain lights up or doesn't light up that allows somebody to think about their body being cut into and like be okay with that in some way. It's very intriguing. And
process that. It's a really good question, or like good.
The fact that your buddy got sick while doing it too is like, I love that you're like, he's like all I don't, if he's listening, I mean this in no ill intent, but it's like, you know, macho, oh, let me cut that thing out. And it's like, all right, here you go. It's like, and then I just imagine him throwing up. Like, it's like, dude, that's the way to disarm somebody who's like wanting to cut into you. Is like, just, yeah, go for it.
I texted both of them afterwards. I was like, I finally had to get a professional to get this thing out of me. Oh man.
Oh goodness. Okay. That was
your wild moment, Ev.
That was an incredible tangent. So we are in Wild32. I'm also going to share two, but one's not necessarily, it's more like an update, and then I'll get to a wild moment, which is kind of what wild moments are, like updates, but within constraints. So anyways, I turned 32 this month during Wild32. And I do feel as though this year is my Wild32. That was a very arbitrary number whenever Tony said, let's do Wild32. And then we accidentally created something that 10 men are engaging with right now, and hopefully 20 sometime in February. But there's something, 32 is a very insignificant year in terms of age, like years that you remember. But it seems as though, because of what we're doing with Wild32 and just what's happening in my life, to be a very significant year for me. And I am amped about Wilds in the Woods, Unrationed, Wild32, and my 33rd year on this earth, but while I'm 32. It's going to be pretty awesome. I'm excited about it. And so that's maybe just an update. My wild moment was I'm training for a marathon that's on February 26th. So we're a little over a month out. This is not something that I ever thought I would do. I had a conversation with somebody the other day. Josh, I like mentioned you in the conversation because not soon after we met, you were running the 100K at Zion. And like your demeanor towards me whenever we would talk about running was like essentially this: oh, you can do that. And there's something about that attitude of like, oh, you can do that. You can do that. That really impacted me in hindsight, even like I didn't notice it in the moment where I was like, oh, Josh is saying something that's impacting me. But in hindsight, your nonchalant attitude towards my ability to do something really hard had a big impact on me. And I've run a few half marathons this year, just on like the trails around my house and the roads around, like, you know, wherever, not a race, I should say. And I did a half last weekend, and it was incredible. And like, I had a consistent cadence for the entire 13.2 miles, and my heart rate was at a really good place. And I feel prepared for a marathon and possibly more this year, which is that feels very wild to me. That is not something that I would have guessed I would be saying this time last year, because I didn't even start running it was not until the end of February last year that I even
So awesome.
got into this stuff. So anyways, that's my wild moment.
Well, thank you for sharing. That's really awesome. Makes me pumped.
It was even during the first Wild 32 was whenever you were doing your 100K. Because Tony and I remember were waiting for an update. Maybe it wasn't during the, was it? Anyway, whether it was or not, I remember waiting for the update and it really setting in like, oh, Josh is running for a very long time. Like, when is he gonna fit? Like, this is crazy. And then Tony would text me, the group screenshots of his runs. And I'm like, man, that just seems not even doable. So anyways, I am honored and a better person for having rubbed shoulders with you two this year.
Likewise, amigo. Likewise.
Yeah, appreciate that.
It's pretty cool.
Should we give update? Like, we've changed some things about Wild 32. Could that just be a segue to our, like, what's going on with Wild 32 and then what it is and then an invitation to join? And then I've read from this before. It's On the Threshold of Transformation, Daily Meditations for Men by Richard Rohr. And I've got this page on one of the meditations is called Into the Wild. And there's like a couple pieces of it that seem very core to what we're trying to do. So let's do Wild 32 updates and then we can kind of close with this Into the Wild meditation, if that works.
Cool.
Let's do it.
So we have 10 people, 2 teams. Team Moustache and Team Beard, named by Tony. You named these, right? And the Moustache and the Beard are on the line. They're on the hook. One of us is losing our facial hair, which is more significant for one of us than the other. Yes.
Well, before we get into that, can I ask a question? So how did this conversation ensue to like create the 2 teams, make it a competition? Like, I wish I could have been a fly on the wall to hear this conversation.
You were on pat leave.
I was.
Evan and I were. This is what happens when you leave us alone. We make this thing even goofier. And we were talking about, really it came out of the logistics of, if we go from 5 people where, like, our main communication mechanism is text, right? And so the challenge is, how do you scale that and how do you get more men involved without the text thread becoming more unruly, right? Getting too noisy and just not being able to follow things. Have the sort of conversation we're having this morning that I have yet to dive into in our thread, Josh. But so the natural way to think about that then is, let's come up with a structure and then replicate it, right? So it's like, okay, if we have 10, we could go with 2 groups of 5. And then Evan's idea that was definitely the facial hair getting shaved. That was his idea.
Well, we had a conversation. I'm going to jump in here for a second. Tell me if you remember this or if I'm remembering it correctly. I'm still in like test mode with Wild 32. Like, let's just test things out. So one thing I threw out was just doing 10 to prove that it's too much. Is like, let's use data to make those decisions. And like, we could stumble into a group of 10 as like the perfect size, or, like, how can we make decisions based off of data and experience, not just always gut feeling. So I was pushing for 10. Tony had some really good pushback to that and was like, essentially very quickly convinced me that 10 is unruly based on our experience with 5. So like, let's stick with 5. And then said something along the lines of a draft where we were going to draft our team members. And that's how we got to 2 teams of 5, which we had 10 people sign up in the first place, which was our goal. Through kind of LinkedIn is where these guys came from, I think, for the most part. So anyways, that's me just interjecting that you convinced me that 2 teams of 5 was better than 1 group of 10.
All right, the facial hair now. So you threw out the facial hair, Evan. Did you know that who threw out the facial hair?
So Tony named the teams he just like we did our draft, which was just a text thread of us picking one name at a time, essentially. And then Tony like sent me the names of the teams in a text at some point. You're like Team Beard, Team Mustache.
You didn't get drafted first, Josh. How do you feel about that?
Well, I actually was going to say who got first round pick, and then I didn't want to know because I thought my ego would get hit a little bit because I assumed it was not a first round draft pick.
But being on paternity leave did not help you with your draft order.
Wait, who did go first, Evan? Who'd you pick first? Did you pick Trent first?
I don't think I did. I picked Kyle and Robert probably, I think, as my first two picks because I didn't know them, but I invited them. So I felt in a way that it's like I wanted to be on their team. I wanted them on my team.
Right. You were my first pick, Wiggle. You were still a first round draft pick. You just weren't the first pick.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. All right. Okay. So now you guys got to talk about the importance of the facial hair. I feel like, Tony, you specifically need to share about yours.
Well, yeah. So the way we've been doing it, we came up with this idea of spankings that, part of Wild32 is we avoid substances stronger than caffeine and we avoid sweets. And there's some leeway for the individuals to decide what those things mean. But if you fail on a given day, you get a spanking. And the man with the most spankings at the end of Wild32 gets the Red Ass Award, the Raw. I have won every Raw to date so far, which is as it should be, as I am the least disciplined person I've ever met. But, but this time around, so what Evan came up with was that the losing captain has to shave his facial hair. And I should say, I had this beard since 2010. Seville actually clarified for me that was incorrect. I have not been clean shaven since 2010, but there was a moment at the beginning of COVID where I gave myself a Fu Manchu. I'll share the photos of that. But it was April of 2020. We weren't leaving the house. I was like, oh, that's kind of funny. So I did that. So I actually have been clean shaven for that part of my face for one day out of the last 12 years. But the structure, I think it's cool how it's worked out where we've expanded the spankings to be for anything, like all the things we track. That's been pretty cool. And actually I've had a blast with that aspect of it where there is the horse race dynamic to what we're doing. And now we have 1 week left and it's pretty close. I do not feel comfortable.
Yes, it is pretty close. I also don't feel comfortable, but I feel more hopeful than I did the first 3 weeks of this whole ordeal. So Trent and I are gunning for the Raw. One of us is gonna get it. And yeah, we'll see what happens.
Yeah. So I got a question now, after talking about this and hearing the backstory. So where does, this whole Wilds in the Woods is about dudes helping dudes be better dudes. And Wild32 is a great place for us to be able to converse and all that good stuff. So when you were coming up with this, and I know it was more of an experiment, but where does competition fit into dudes helping dudes be better dudes? Is it a fun, as you're experiencing it as the team captains, are you seeing this as an integral part to the progression of healthy masculinity?
That's an awesome question. And the answer for me is yes. But I'm not convinced that I'm right on this, but the way we've been thinking about this stuff as we've developed these ideas so much of it is, it's just sort of us exploring ourselves, right? And so like the challenge is us facing up to uncertainty, facing up to fear, facing up to the darkness within, right? Like that sort of stuff. But there is something primal and I would say very natural about the camaraderie and the feelings that come with competition, and not necessarily, you know, like sports have been a big part of, I know for you, Josh, and for myself, and Evan, you've done some competing in your life as well. Like that's a natural way we interact as, and like for me, the primary way that I've connected with dudes throughout my life. So to be able to work that aspect in here and just like get that fire going a little bit, like just stoking that competitive fire, like, ooh, nice. And like giving us something to push back against, other than like the resistance, right? What I would call resistance, or, you know, like reality, right? That we have this, I can push back against Evan here. You know, like I can taunt Evan's team members in the comments on LinkedIn about how I'm coming for their facial hair. That's been really funny and fun. And I think both motivating, and I think it creates this like cohesive effect where it's like the thing takes more shape. Evan, what do you think about that?
I think there's a difference between, I don't know exactly how to define competition in this context, because and I can't tell if it's competition or consequences that is doing the uniting and motivating. So we added in both pieces, but I don't know if it's true competition, because nobody is rooting for somebody to not be a better man, which I would kind of, if I were to get down to like what I believe competition is, it means there's a winner and a loser, and we actually don't want anybody to lose. So it doesn't feel as though it's a competition, in the sense that nobody participating in this wants somebody to be a worse person at the end of it, which
Brilliant.
I would have to like define competition as that. So, but there are consequences. So we're engaging with something, acknowledging that our behavior or lack of behavior leads to consequences. And then there's a uniting force around those consequences. We are working together, and either you work together for like a specific outcome, I would say, more than competition. But it does feel like sports whenever you're playing against another team and somebody has to win, somebody has to lose, and you shake hands at the end of it. Like that's a friendly competition, if you will.
Yeah.
I just don't know exactly how to nail down that word. A lot of my thinking on that, I had a conversation with Tucker from LinkedIn, Tucker Bascom, and he thinks competition is bad, and I think competition is good. And so we got on Zoom and just debated it for a little bit, the two of us, and it was an awesome conversation. And so I started trying to create more words to describe what I mean by competition. And I think in this instance, it's consequences more than it is competition.
Yeah.
I would push back on the idea that competition inherently means like somebody, I forget the wording you used, but it was like that not only are you losing, but it's like you get worse in some way. Whereas the ideal of competition is that both sides are at their best, right? And they're bringing everything they have to bear, and they're putting it all out there. And, you know, with the understanding that there will be somebody who comes out on top this time, but that there are, and this idea that we learn more from our losses than from our victories. You know, like even in the losing, there's progress to be made and lessons to be learned and wins to be taken from there. Where for us, every day we're aggregating progress, you know, in all these different ways, where at the end of 32 days, we're going to have 10 men who are in a better place than they were 32 days earlier. And so like we're winning on all fronts, right? Like all the way across. But that competition, yeah, I think that's a bad take by Tucker. If what he's saying is that just like competition is de facto, but I like it certainly has dark sides, but like that's just to deny our nature, right? In a way that doesn't strike me as healthy or useful.
Well, I think you and I probably think too similarly to have a valid debate about it, because you and I would even be on the same side, like debating like pushing back against Tucker. And I'm not representing his ideas fully or fairly, I should say. So to say that, to speak more on it, it would be nice to have him here, which maybe we do that one time. I think he would be down. And the dude has some really deep and good thoughts on competition that are challenging, at least in a way that made me want to develop more language to describe what I meant by competition. I do think it's biologically. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, Josh, as the one who's competed at the highest level of the three of us, what do you think about that?
Well, I have one additional question and one thought. I'll ask the question first. Do you think, so now that there has been an element of competition inserted into this design, which most likely will not go away, because I think all three of us value competition very much. That being said, what now is our responsibility to contextualize competition in the right way? So that's my question to you both, and then I'll give you my response. But I'll give backstory too. In our world, right, we do a ton of consulting for nonprofits at Mission Matters Group, and we talk about contextualizing business frameworks in the nonprofit space. There's terminology that's different. There's an ethos or an essence that might be different in how a nonprofit applies a framework that might be different than a for-profit. Not always, but a little bit different. So in this situation, if we're not all fighting the same fight, fighting the same battle, so competition does need to be contextualized. And I think kind of like what you said, the perspective of it and the words for it are very important. So introducing it into something that's supposed to help dudes get better, what's our responsibility for education?
What indeed? Yeah.
I think I immediately take this question to like outside of just competition. Like, what's our responsibility for education is the question. It seems as though you're asking, not just on competition, but maybe on all of the things that we're doing. So it's more of a philosophical question on what our responsibility is, or what we see our responsibility is on teaching others or contextualizing what we're doing for others. Is that
yeah, I think that's a fair way to put it.
Okay. That is a really good question, because I tend to land like at the end of my thinking on this type of a question or this question, I tend to land somewhere along the lines of personal responsibility. It's like at the end of the day, we're responsible for ourselves, and in a way that if we're responsible for ourselves, we then are the type of person that is looking out for others, but those people are also responsible for themselves. So maybe for my kids is a good example. Is like I feel responsible for my kids as their father. At a certain point in their life, they will take on that responsibility, and there will be consequences for their decisions that are their responsibility, not my responsibility, unless I choose to make it my responsibility. But there's like a choice in there, it seems, particularly with the age of the men we're working with. I think the more responsibility we put on our shoulders to contextualize concepts or make sure we get it right, the less effective we will be. Where I think it's like we put that responsibility on those that are engaging with what we're doing, and that is part of the process of becoming a more developed human being. or i.e. a better man. So personal responsibility, we each take it seriously on our own and then bring that to the table. And it's not necessarily an organizational responsibility, although the fact that the three of us are committed to that personal responsibility then becomes an organizational responsibility. I don't know. I'm very curious to hear your thoughts, Josh, but Tony, go for it.
What comes to mind is we want to avoid a situation where people end up feeling bad because we're competing, right? And how I think about that is, number one, if you do lose in a way that makes you mad, like that's something that happens. Like if you get focused on the outcome rather than the inputs, and then also comparison. Like when we get caught up in comparing ourselves and saying, I'm not as good as, like that's a path to negativity and anxiety, despair. Part of what makes what we're doing, to me, interesting, and I think it's why we're on the right track, is any of the 10 men in Wild32 is equally capable of being the best member of Wild32. Like any one of us is.
And how are you defining best there? Like getting the
fewest
least amount of-
spankings.
Okay.
Fewest spankings, right? So if this were a group where the competition is around running, then Josh is going to be, I don't know how a few of these men are as runners, but I would imagine that Josh is the best runner of the 10 of us, and he will be all the time. We could run this 100 times and Josh would be the best of us, unless he gets hurt, which, I might hurt him to give myself a better shot, but that
is an unintended consequence of some competition is that
it's like
very scenario.
You end up rooting for somebody else to fail, right?
Yeah.
Whereas what we're doing here is your ability to do it is a product of your it's a product of time and attention, right? And that it's just, there's a challenge in finding the time, like Josh was saying earlier, that some of, if you've got kids, to go on top of the job, it gets more challenging. And yeah, attention is a challenge to find, right? But assuming we're able to do that, then like the way we've drawn this up, there's a whole lot of leeway for us to adjust it to who we are and how we go through the world, right? Where any one of us on any given day is the best or the worst at what we're doing, right? And so I think that aspect of it, that it's like is like, how well can you pay attention to this stuff and carve out the time to commit to improving in this way. And I find that to be, I think that's going to end up being really key. Like if this grows the way that we think it can, I think we've landed on a design for Wild32 that we can welcome a lot of men into the fold on this thing in a way that gains momentum over time, and I think gives us a lot of juicy stuff to play with in terms of form and how to connect.
It's really good stuff. Evan, when you were talking, I've been reading this. I learned the word maybe middle of last year. Laura introduced it to me, my wife, and it's Ubuntu. Have you heard this before? Not like the operating system, but so it's like a African philosophy or like way of life. And I just Googled it just to like make sure I captured it. And the first thing that pops up, it basically, it's best expressed in I am because of who we all are. So it puts an emphasis on, I think to your point, making it very personal. However, my personal growth is directly tied to your personal growth as well. And so it creates a different responsibility, conviction, motivation to celebrate the wins, but also pursue the wins in your own individual life. And so that was resonating a lot when you were talking. Then the other thing, just in terms of like competition that popped in my mind, where I played soccer in college, and I had this dude that I played in high school, like club ball and in college together. Tony knows him. His name's Jimmy Holmes. We call him Jimbo. And the dude is a fierce competitor, just like straight up competitor. And in practice, I loved competing against him because he would just bring it. To Tony's point, he would show up, give his best every time you would go for the ball. And I loved when I got to when I would beat him or take the ball from him, and I would despise when like he scored on me or something. But we brought it in those moments, right? So it was like this perfect thing that we were on the same team, yet in that moment, our responsibility to each other was to compete, to push so that it could further the team's objective. And that right there, I feel like, is what encapsulates what's going on with Wild32, in that I want all of us to succeed, but I also want to push myself to make Evan and his team perform, because it'll be a victory to like see a shaving. I think a mass shaving would be really, really fun to see.
To be fair, I don't expect anybody else to shave. It is just me that's committed to the shave. So Kyle, if you're listening, your mustache, which is way better than mine, is not at stake here, unless you're a team captain in one of these future ones, which I imagine that'll take place. But yeah,
I might call him out though on that. But we still have a week to go. It is not at all a foregone conclusion
that type of competition you're describing, Josh, seems like a very healthy definition in the way you almost want the opposing team, like even somebody that's not on your team, to bring their best. You want to win when your opponent is at their best.
For
like,
sure.
That seems like a definition of honor, or like you don't want to carry around a win when your team was at their worst, when your opponent was at their worst. Like it doesn't even feel like a win at that point. So you want your opponent to bring their best in practice on the same team and the other team, even if it results in a loss, because then you lose to somebody when they're at their best too. So yeah, I think we're all fairly aligned on all of that. And it does seem as though the things that we're implementing this round will appear in future rounds. It's like, took a really cool leap this time, even in the way that I'm mentally engaged with it. And really, there are things clicking this time that have not clicked in previous rounds. And I don't know that it's all attributed to that. It's probably several things, but yeah.
The sentiment of not wanting to let your team down is like a very motivating and powerful sentiment. Now it too can be like manipulated, right? It could just be all about the team and I lose sight of individual progression, but hopefully it's like kind of like a fake it till you make it. Like there will be unintended positive consequences, potentially unintended negative consequences, but I have found that very, very rewarding this time around.
And for those of us in it who are married, I imagine those unintended consequences ripple out like into our marriage, into our children's lives, our families' lives. I know Grace and I had a birthday trip to Mexico during this Wild32 at an all-inclusive resort. So it was not the ideal scenario for competing in Wild32, but we exercised together for the first time on vacation ever. We sat in silence, like on the beach together for like we weren't on the beach praying or meditating in previous trips to this place. And we drank less. I ate less. We felt better than ever on a vacation. Like we've never felt so good on a vacation before. Even though it likely will earn me the raw for this round is worth it. It's like, it was an incredible trip. And I think in large part is because I was just more aware that there were consequences. Like I was going to lose my mustache because we went on this trip to Mexico. And so I was minimizing the consequences of my actions, or was just more aware of them in a way that was so life-giving. So I think it spreads, like not just to the 10 men who are participating, but to the people in their lives, that shared responsibility, that what is the word? Ubuntu. Yeah, that's great. So initially I was going to read something from this book, but I think this is like a great place to wrap up this episode. Should we just do the next episode on this meditation?
Sounds great.
Cliffhanger. Yeah, perfect.
All right. When are we doing our next Wild 32?
I was thinking we give it a week or two between, but we should get that on the calendar. Looks like, Josh, you know that we're intending to go to 4 teams. Have you heard that? Yeah. Buckle up. Yeah. So, the losing team, are we on board with the idea that the winners get to run it back? The losing team gets dismantled and then the remaining teams get redrafted. Does that sound good?
Oh, baby.
Yeah. And Josh, I also had the idea that maybe not the first time you run it back, but like if it looks like a team is threatening to become a dynasty, let's say like after the second time you win, then for that third round, that team adds another thing they're tracking.
Oh boy.
Yeah. So like then you're adding just another grounds for getting a spanking, right?
I don't know that I like that one necessarily, because you want like to win on equal terms. Like if I was an opposing team and you were adding more things, I'd be like, well, I want to add more things. I want to beat you at the same game, not whenever you're playing a harder game than I'm playing.
Yeah. Well, so that's what we're talking about. But I mean, I'm at a point where I think
you just think you have a dynasty on your hands.
Given the team I have, I was just saying how we all are equally capable of winning on any given day, but no, my team is going to win on every.
Just takes one planned trip to Mexico and your team has a harder time. So, yeah. If you want to do Wild 32, if you're still listening to this and you're interested in doing this thing with us, go to wildsandthewoods.com or find Tony, Josh, or I on LinkedIn. We might respond quicker if you just find us on LinkedIn. We have a LinkedIn group now with like 45 men in it. We'll be telling them about the next round. You can join that group. We would love to have you do this thing with us. And this one's not even over, and I'm excited about the next one in a way that just feels really nice. Like this is a really meaningful thing to engage with. So join us. Thanks for listening to the Unrationed podcast.
Later.